Hi friends, very good morning to all of you. Now let us see the editorials that have appeared in the Hindu newspaper. The first one is Deconstructing Declarations of Carbon Neutrality. Friends, this article appeared in yesterday's edition of Hindu newspaper, and this article appeared in the context of the United States and not the United States, but many states in the developed world, including the European Union, have declared carbon neutrality by, several years. Majority of them declared by 2050 they are going to achieve the carbon neutrality. So in this context, there is pressure growing on India that it should also declare carbon neutrality in the future. It should declare its targets for the carbon neutrality. In this article, the authors suggest that India should not fall into the trap of carbon neutrality because India's priorities are different from those that are already developed. So India should not fall into this trap. So this is the main theme of the first article. Right, friends? Let us go and see in detail about this article. Friends, deconstructing declarations of carbon neutrality, India should not join this game as it has to stay focused on development as its immediate need and aspirational goal. Friends, there is always a debate about the environment versus development. So India's prime goal should be development, and later it can focus on the environmental targets. Right, friends? At the latest count by the non-profit Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit (ACIU), at the beginning of April, 32 countries had declared in some documented form their proposed intention to achieve carbon neutral status by mid-century thereabouts. So this mid-century is by 2050. Right, friends? Of these, only 8 have any film status, the rest being in the form of proposed legislation on mentions in policy documents. Friends, among these 32 countries, only 8 have film status of committing themselves, and the rest are only proposals. Friends, since some months ago, the UN Secretary General has taken the lead in speaking of an international chorus led by global civil society organizations based in the developed countries. So the United Nations Secretary General has taken lead in speaking about the carbon neutral achievement. Right, friends? And they are encouraged by their governments that is urging all countries, especially India, to make explicit declarations. So in a way, pressure is being mounted on India to make declarations that are explicit for the commitment of carbon neutrality. Okay, friends, now we will see the temperature goals under the Paris Climate Agreement and the possibility of achieving those goals. Right, friends? The impetus for such declarations arises from Article 4.1 of the Paris Agreement. So the basis, the kind of legality comes from the Paris Climate Agreement, and especially from the Article 4.1 in that agreement. So to commit such kind of carbon neutrality declarations. Friends, the details about the 4.1 article are is completely given here. You can go through it and try to understand it. Friends, the temperature goals, the temperature goal referred to is the much better known declaration of intent of the Paris Agreement. So this is the intent, the known declaration of intent in the Paris Agreement of limiting temperature rise to well below 2 degrees centigrades and further pursuing efforts to restrict it to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So friends, that is similar or comes from the declaration of intent that is mentioned in the Paris Climate Agreement. What is the declaration of intent? It is about limiting the temperature rise well below the 2 degrees centigrade. This target below 2 degrees centigrade is from the pre-industrial levels. So we have to reduce the temperature. I mean, we have to keep the temperature rise within the 2 degrees centigrade from the pre-industrial level temperature levels, and we have to pursue efforts to restrict this temperature rise to 1.5%. 1.5%. So this is the intent of declaration of intent in the Paris Agreement. So the basis for declaring carbon neutrality comes from here. So this is the main emphasis. Right, friends, it is evident that the balance of emissions and removal of greenhouse gases is not sought on a country-wise basis, but for the world as a whole. Friends, in the Paris Agreement, this emphasis on removal of greenhouse gases and reducing the carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions, it is not mentioned, not sought by the country wise, but as a world all over, as the globe all over, right? Though both developed country governments and civil society outfits commonly state this as an individual commitment by all countries, the text of the Paris Agreement clearly indicates, based on the considerations of equality and differentiation, that this is a global goal. Friends, the developed countries and well as the civil society organizations based there, they say that the commitments made to Paris Agreement are are at the individual level, means individual countries made these commitments. But if we clearly understand and see the text of the Paris Climate Agreement, this is never mentioned explicitly. So the target of keeping the temperature rises within the 2 degrees centigrade 2 degrees degree uh, centigrade is a common goal, a global goal, and it is not pertaining to individual countries. Right, friends? However, there are two related and more critical issues that are often ignored. So, what are the two issues? The first one is the compatibility of the intent of Article 4.1 and Article 2. So, the first one pertains to the compatibility of the intent of the compatibility of the intent of the Article 4.1 and the Article 2. Friends, is the achievement of carbon neutrality compatible with the achieving the 1.5 degree centigrade or 2.2 degree centigrade goal? So if the countries are declaring the carbon neutrality, will it be possible that the goals under the Paris Agreement, that is restricting the temperature rises to 2 degrees centigrade, is it possible? That is the first problem. And the second one is whether the mid-century carbon neutrality goals, mid-century means 2050, these are the carbon neutrality goals that have to be achieved by 2050 of developed countries are compatible with Article 2.2 that declares that Paris Agreement, this is the declaration under 2.2, will be implemented to reflect equality and principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of the different national circumstances. So friends, achieving global, reducing the greenhouse gases and fighting the climate change is an important thing, but there are certain principles that should be followed in fighting this climate change. Those are equity principle and the common but differentiated responsibilities, and the third one is respective capabilities. Friends, these are the very important principles in combating the climate change or in reducing the greenhouse gases. There should be equity, there should be common but differentiated responsibilities, which means the developed and developing countries have different responsibilities. They are the responsibilities are not equal, because developed countries have contributed much more in terms of carbon dioxide to the environment. So they have the greater responsibility of reducing the greenhouse gases. And the third one is respective capabilities. So all the countries do not have the same capacity to reduce the greenhouse gases. So the reduction target should reflect the respective capabilities. So friends, the the target of the intent of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, will that reflect these principles, those that are mentioned under article 2.2 of the Paris Climate Agreement? The author says no. Right friends, he further says current pledges fall short. Friends, the hard scientific reality is that such a three-way compatibility between temperature goals, carbon neutrality and equity is not only not guaranteed, but cannot be achieved for the 1.5 degree centigrade temperature goal at all. Right friends, the author says that the three-way compatibility between temperature goals, the carbon neutrality and equity is excuse me. So this cannot be guaranteed, and the target of restricting temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade is not at all achievable. Friends, and even for the 2 degree centigrade goal, the current pledges are highly inadequate. So the developing countries are taking lead and uh, declaring carbon neutrality by 2050. Even those are not sufficient for achieving the 2 degree centigrade goal. Friends, this harsh conclusion follows from straightforward scientific considerations based on the global carbon budget, which indicates the limits on global cumulative emissions from the pre-industrial era to the time when net emissions cease, that correspond to the definite levels of global temperature. So the author say that it is based on these conclusions are based on the scientific studies and evidences. Right friends, here they have quoted some calculations and how the goals are insufficient to achieve the goals under the Paris Climate Agreement. Let us see them. Friends, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is IPCC, special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade warming, what remains of this global carbon budget from 2018 onwards for a 50% probability of restricting temperature rise to less than 1 degree centigrade is 480 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So what we have the budget, how much budget we have? 480 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Friends, at the current rate of emissions about 42 gigatons of carbon equivalent per year, this budget would be consumed in 12 years. So this 480 gigatons of budget will be consumed in 12 years at the present rate of emissions. So to keep within the 480 gigatons of budget at a steady linear rate of decline, global carbon neutrality must be reached by 2039. So not 2050, but we should reach the carbon neutrality by 2039. Friends, while this is quite clearly infeasible, other pathways that either front load or back load the period of most rapid decline have even greater barriers to realization. So the author says that there is no other way of achieving this goal, if not by 2050, because the most of the countries the carbon emissions are on the rise, and it is highly impossible to reduce them in the near future. Right, friends? For a 50% probability of restricting temperature rise to below 2 degrees centigrade, the budget is considerably more generous. So what the author is saying that if we keep the target as 2 degrees centigrade, the goal is, the probability is more generous, more achievable. So friends, amounting to about 1400 gigatons of carbon equivalent, that provides considerably greater room for maneuver. So what the author is saying is that the 2 degree centigrade goal is more realistic, more probability of achieving it. Friends, now the author here examined the emissions in the West, especially for the United States of America and also for the European Union. So let's go and see them. Friends, the hollowness of national level carbon neutrality declarations by developed countries is brought out more starkly when we consider the details, as in case of the United States and European Union. So the author says that if we consider nation-wise, it is a folly that when we examine the US and European Union's carbon emissions goals, he says it is highly unrealistic. So friends, the emissions in the US peaked in 2005 and have declined at an average rate of 1.1% from then till 2017, with a maximum annual reduction of 6.3% in 2019. So this happened at the height of the recessions. So the decline in US carbon emissions is at an annual average rate of 1.1%. Friends, even if it did reach net zero by 2050 at a steady linear rate of reduction, which is unprecedented, its cumulative emissions between 2018 and 2050 would be 106 gigatons of carbon equivalent, which is 22% of the total remaining carbon budget of the whole world. So still, if even United States of America is reducing its carbon emissions, it is going to consume 22% of the global budget that is available, that is 480 gigatons of carbon emissions. So the United States is going to consume major chunk of this global budget. So friends, this is so high that unless others reduced emissions at even faster rates, the world would most certainly cross 1.5 degrees centigrade warming. So when United States of America consumes available 22% of the available budget, rest of the countries have to reduce their emissions at a steep rate. Even then, it becomes very highly difficult to limit the temperature rise at 1.5 degrees centigrade. Okay friends, indeed, if the US has to stay within its fair share of the remaining carbon budget, it would have to reach net zero emissions by 2055. So if United States of America has to remain within its share of global carbon budget, it has to achieve net zero emissions by 2025. Friends, it would still owe a carbon debt of 470 gigatons of carbon equivalent to the rest of the world for having used more than its fair share of carbon space in the past. Because friends, United States of America has the history of contributing more to the greenhouse gases. So even it achieves carbon neutrality by 2055, it still owes a debt of 470 gigatons of carbon equivalent to the rest of the world. Friends, at a very moderate carbon price of $30 per ton of carbon dioxide, this translates to a carbon debt of over $14 trillion that the US owes to the world. So this is a very big debt that is owed to the world by the United States of America. Friends, similarly, the European Union, to keep its fair share of the remaining carbon budget, would have to reach net zero by 2033. Friends, the EU has to reach net zero by 2033. Friends, with a consistent annual reduction in emissions, individual countries will have different dates for a fair net zero. For example, Germany is going to, declare that it will achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Friends, if the EU reaches net zero only by 2050, it would consume at least 71 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, well above its fair share. So even if EU want to, going to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050, it is going to consume at least 71 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, well above its fair share. Friends, either way, the EU owes the world a carbon debt of $9.3 trillion for the past emissions. So friends, this is the story. Friends, a section of the climate policy modeling literature has promoted the illusion that this three-way compatibility is feasible through speculative negative emissions, ostensibly through dramatic expansion of carbon capture, primarily by biosphere. So some organizations are spreading literature that by declaring carbon neutrality and through the negative emissions, that is kind of carbon capture and storage, etc., we can achieve the Paris climate targets. And the author feels that that is highly impossible. Friends, they have also been promoting the other illusion that not resorting to any serious emissions increase at all is the means to guarantee the successful development of the third world. So they are also spreading some illusion that if the developing countries want to develop, there is no need for consuming. They need not follow the high energy consuming model of economic growth or development. So this is one more illusion they are spreading. Friends, India has no carbon debt. So India clearly should not join the game of carbon neutrality declarations for a number of reasons, and the author mentions several reasons. Those are, for one, India has to stay focused on development. So friends, our primary concern is development, because majority, much proportion of our population is still in still below the poverty line. So our primary goal is to remove the poverty and focus on the development. Friends, both as its immediate need and as well as its aspirational goal. So development should be our immediate goal, and also it should be our aspirational goal. Friends, while sustainability is desirable, the question of how India's future low carbon development can be is highly uncertain. So friends, whether we can achieve the development with a low carbon what should I say regimen, it is highly speculative, highly uncertain. So we should not blindly commit to the target of carbon neutrality. Right, friends? India's current low carbon footprint is a consequence of utter poverty and deprivation and of majority of its population. So India's low carbon footprint is because of utter poverty and deprivation of majority of its population, and not by virtue of sustainability. Right, friends? So we have to, the author suggests that we have to follow some kind of energy rich development model in order to bring majority of our population out of the poverty line. Friends, the second issue is India does not owe a carbon debt to the world. Friends, India's emissions are no more than 3.5% of the global cumulative emissions prior to 1990, and about 5% since till 2018. So India's carbon footprint as well as the contribution to global carbon emissions is very low. Friends, we constitute about 16 to 17% of the total world population, but our contribution to the greenhouse gases is 3.5% till 1990 and 5% till 2018. Friends, nor are India's current annual emissions such as to seriously dent the emissions gap between what the world needs and the current level of migration effort, even as India's migration efforts are quite compatible with a 2 degree centigrade target. Even if India is following energy intensive development models, they are still incompatible with the target under the Paris Climate Agreement. Friends, any self-sacrificial declaration of carbon neutrality today in the current international scenario would be a wasted gesture, reducing the burden of the developed world and transferring it to the backs of the Indian people. Friends, the author feels that if India makes any such commitment that it will it will achieve, it will commit to the carbon neutrality, it will be a favor to the developed world and the consequences have to be suffered by the Indian people. So the author feels that India should not commit to such kind of commitments. Friends, much of the argument for India declaring a target year for net zero derives unfortunately from some form of climate hubris accompanied by the hype that India risks being left out of some imagined goal convergence in the climate arena. So India should not fall in this hype or uh, inflated situation, and India should be careful and not fall into this trap. Friends, one variant of hubris is India taking the lead in some global ecological alternative driven by frugality, minimal consumption, and a little technological advance. Friends, another imagines that India will somehow, in very short order, emerge as the global leader of green manufacturing and industry. So the author feels that this is also not going to happen any sooner. Friends, while the latter is believed by the character of India's overall growth trajectory, the former is clearly socio-politically infeasible and morally unacceptable. So any ideal situations that India is shown into, those are highly unrealistic and non-achievables. That is what the author feels. Friends, India's twin burden of low carbon development and adaptation to climate impacts is onerous and no doubt requires serious concerted action. Friends, India's approach to even eventual net zero emissions is contingent on deep first world emissions reductions and an adequate and unambiguous global carbon budget. So friends, first the author feels that first the developed countries have to commit, they have to show that uh, deep declines, deep declines in the carbon emissions, then India can commit to net zero commitments. Friends, meanwhile, India must reject any attempt to restrict its options and be led into a low development trap based on pseudo-scientific narratives. So India should be careful and should not fall into the trap of net zero emissions targets. So this is the author feels. Friends, this is all about the net zero emissions and how India should be careful and should not fall into the trap. Right, friends. The next article, plow to plate hand held by the Indian state. Friends, this article appeared in today's edition of Hindu newspaper, and for me every sentence, every line of this article looked very important, and you can use much of the information in writing your mains answer, and as well as if any essay comes in the examination about the agriculture, this information that is discussed here is very important for your examination, either for your mains answer writing or for the even for the essay. So please focus and try to learn everything from the article. Right, friends, plow to plate hand held by the Indian state. The distinct characteristics of India's agriculture require that a reformed state must ensure farmer consumer welfare. So the reformed state must ensure farmer consumer welfare. Friends, this article is written by the by Mihir Shah. He is the former member of the Planning Commission, and let us see what is there in the article. Friends, for the least 4 decades now, economic policy making globally has dogmatically adhered to the notion that a progressively reduced role for the state would automatically deliver greater economic growth and welfare to the people. Friends, this is about the withdrawal of state or rolling back the state, and this will lead to welfare of the people. Since reform, by definition, is taken to mean only one thing, that is, the state that has played the leading role in provisioning the most critical aspects of life like water, sanitation, education, health, food and nutrition. So friends, the before 1990s, before liberalization, before the withdrawal of the state from the public sphere providing the services, it has believed that the state had a strong and leading role in providing these basic necessities directly to the people. Friends, there are very specific characteristics of agriculture as also crucial elements of socio historical context, which imply that the Indian state must continue to intervene in multiple markets and make critical investments to ensure the welfare of both farmers and consumers. Friends, the author feels that there are specific characteristics uh, for the Indian agriculture sector, which which require that Indian government should play a proactive role so that it can ensure welfare to both farmers and consumers. That means he wants that the state should not withdraw from the agriculture sector, and instead it should play a proactive role. Friends, now we will see the specificities of the agriculture. Friends, due to a variety of limiting factors, from uncertainties of the weather to soil fertility and water availability, increasing returns to scale are very difficult to achieve in the farming. So these all are very difficult in agriculture because of the weather and soil fertility and water availability. Increasing the returns to scale, this is very difficult in the farming. Achieving them is very difficult in the farming. Friends, this underscores the need for right kind of public investment in agriculture. So this requires the need for a right kind of public investment in the agriculture. Friends, one more thing you have to remember, that the private investment in the agriculture sector is very less, because the profits or the returns in the agriculture sector are being very low. The private sector shied away from investing in the agriculture, especially in the infrastructure development in the agriculture sector. So because of that reason also, there is a need for public investment in the agriculture sector. Friends, again, economies of scale allow producers in industry to make profits by cutting unit costs even as prices fall, while those who fail to make the cut get eliminated from the competition. Friends, the industry has the option or the facility of getting profits by reducing the costs, input costs, even the prices are falling. How can do achieve that? They can do away with some employees, and they can reduce the cost, and even still they can get the profits. This option is not available for the agriculture sector. Friends, but in agriculture, members of the family can be drafted to work on the family's farm, as also in other farm and non-farm work. So here in agriculture, members of the family can be drafted as workers. Friends, this phenomenon is quite widespread in India today. What is the phenomenon? uh, of 9 crore rural families who draw their main income from unskilled manual labor, 4 crore are small and marginal farmers. So friends, among the 9 crore rural families, 4 crore are small and marginal farmers whose lands are less than 2 hectares. Friends, through overwork and self-exploitation, peasant farmers are able to cling on to their land. So how they are able to cling on to their land? By self-exploitation and as well as through overwork. So only because of that they are able to cling on to their lands. Friends, again, production process in agriculture cannot be organized in an assembly line. Friends, assembly line is very crucial for achieving the economies of scale, or I would say industrialized. It is very important for the industrialized economy, especially in the manufacturing sector. So the companies get profits or dominate the markets by achieving the assembly lines. Friends, this is very difficult in the agriculture. Friends, they need to begin at the appropriate phase of the climatic annual cycle. The agriculture, the farming has to start at a specific appropriate phase of the climatic annual cycle. So in India, for example, Kharif season starts in the month of June, just before the monsoon starts. Friends, this means that all the farmers harvest their crop at the very same time. So there is no other option. They have to start the production at the same time, and they have to, all the farms, all the produce comes to harvest at the same time. There is no other option. Friends, as 86% of India's farmers are small and marginal, too poor to afford warehousing facilities, and are therefore compelled to bring their harvest to market at around the same time. So they start producing at the same time, and they harvest at the same time, and they have to sell the produce at the same time. Right, friends? Since demand for food crops is typically price inelastic during the bumper crop, while prices fall, the resulting rise in demand is not enough to salvage farmer incomes. So as agriculture products are highly price inelastic, means with the increasing production, the demand will not increase. So that is the inelasticity of the agricultural products. For example, if there is a bumper crop of paddy, suppose we say a farmer produced 2 quintals, if he suddenly produces 3 quintals, because of the high availability of the paddy rice, the consumers are not going to purchase them, because their consumption of rice is hardly increases. I mean, this is the nature of the agricultural products. This we call it as inelasticity. So because of that, the farmers are not in a position to reap the benefits because of the bumper crop. Friends, correspondingly, for poor consumers, unregulated markets for food grains mean that during a drought they either starve or get pauperized, being forced to buy very expensive commodities conveniently hoarded up by the traders. So when the bumper crop is there, the producers are not going to reap the benefits, and similarly, when there is a drought, the poor consumers, they are going to suffer, because the traders will hoard the commodities and sell at inflated prices. Right, friends, we will see balance of power. These traders double up as money lenders, and the operation of a deeply exploitative grid of interlocked markets afflicts most farmers. So friends, these traders double up as money lenders also, and it is a complex system. We further are going to see and understand how it is a complex system, and the trader comes in many avatars in to the lives of farmers and as well as the consumers. Friends, in the credit market, usurious interest rates, sometimes they go up to 60 to 120% of the annum, 120% per annum, created debt trap from which it is virtually impossible to escape. So in the credit market, the interest rates are very high. Because of that, it is very difficult to escape from this debt trap. Friends, the repayments due are adjudged through exploitative practices in the input, output, labor and land lease markets. So the repayments are really very high. Friends, the money lender combines the roles of the input supplier, and he can all be the money lender. Sometimes he can be the trader himself. So the money lender combines the roles of input supplier, crop buyer, labor employer and land lessor. So he comes in these many avatars. Right friends, this interlocked grid works in tandem with the oppressive caste system, with the poorer lower caste farmers facing a cumulative and a cascading spiral of exploitation, expropriation. So the traders, the money lender comes in several avatars, and he kind of sucks the blood of the poor caste oppressed poor farmers, and this is very problematic for the small and marginal farmers. Friends, all the above reasons provide a strong case for state intervention in multiple agricultural markets. So friends, all these issues gives a strong base that the government should interfere in the agriculture markets. Friends, we will see about the diversifying about the public procurement. Friends, the Food Corporation of India (FCI) and Agricultural Prices Commission, that is now CACP, Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices. This established in 1985. FCI was established in 1965. Friends, the idea was that output rises with the Green Revolution. Farmers are assured that their surplus would be brought by the government at a price high enough to leave them a margin. So these both of these organizations have been created that the excessive production that is coming because of the Green Revolution, it has to be procured, and the farmers will get a sizable proportion of margin benefits. Friends, the crops procured were then made available to the consumers at a subsidized rates through the PDS, public distribution system. So these organizations will procure the food grains that leaves a sizable margin for the farmers, and then the procured food grains will be supplied to the people uh, through a subsidized rate system under the public distribution system. Friends, this the government intervention protected farmers during bumper crops and dipped into the buffer stock to protect the consumers during the droughts. So here the concept of buffer crops has come into existence. Friends, this is how India got its much wanted food security over the past several decades. So how the food security for India has been achieved: when there is bumper crop, the food grains were procured and a buffer was created, and when there was drought, these stocks from the buffers were drawn and supplied to people at subsidized rates. So this is how food security in India has been achieved. Friends, however, the Green Revolution also sowed the seeds of its own destruction. So the Green Revolution has its own seeds of destruction. Let us see how. Friends, more than 3 lakh farmers have committed suicide in the past 30 years, a phenomenon completely unprecedented in Indian history. So the unwanted result of Green Revolution is 30 lakh, 3 lakh farmers have been committed suicides in the past 30 years. Friends, there is growing evidence of steady decline in water tables and water quality because of overuse and overexploitation of groundwater. Friends, the yield response to application of increasingly expensive chemical inputs is falling. So the yield response to synthetic fertilizers or the application of chemical inputs is falling. which has meant higher cost of cultivation without corresponding rise in output. So with the application of chemical inputs, the yield response is not that encouraging. So the outputs are not rising, but the input cost is increasing. Friends, around 90% of India's water is consumed in farming, and of this 80% is used by rice, wheat and sugarcane. Especially friends, rice and sugarcane are water guzzling crops. So 80% is consumed by these three categories of crops. Friends, farmers continue to grow these water intensive crops even in water short regions, primarily because of an assured market, that is for rice and wheat, in the form of public procurement, which still covers only a very low proportion of India's crops, regions and farmers. So the PDS procurement for wheat and rice is available only in Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, and it covers less than 10. I mean, it covers only 10 to 12% of the farmers, and only covers two crops, that is rice and wheat. Covers only few regions, that is Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, and covers very less proportion of the farmers, that is 10 to 12% of the farmers. Friends, thus we need to greatly expand the basket of public procurement to include more crops, more regions and more farmers. So if done right, this single reform would secure multiple win-wins. Those can be higher and more sustainable farmer incomes, greater water security and a better consumer health. So what are the win-wins? Higher and more sustainable farmer incomes, greater water security and better consumer health. Friends, procurement must be local and follow the logic of regional agro diversity. Friends, similar to this recommendation is also given by the Shantakumar committee of 2015. This is about the reforms in the PDS. The committee has also recommended similar recommendation, that is for decentralizing the procurement of the food grains. Right friends, huge volumes of water could be saved if cropping patterns are diversified to include a variety of millets, pulses and oilseeds. So if the government, the Food Corporation of India and other organizations start procuring diverse food products like millets, pulses and oilseeds, the farmers will start growing these crops because of the price assurity, and the on the consequence, the water guzzling crops rice, paddy and wheat can be reduced. So there is a need for a change in the cropping pattern. Friends, let us see ensuring a steady market. To incentivize farmers to make this change, government must include them in the procurement operations. Friends, a useful benchmark could be 25% of the actual production of the commodity for that particular season, as proposed under the 2018 Pradhan Mantri Annadata Aay Surakshan Abhiyan, that is PM Asha scheme. So the author suggests this under as assured in the PM Asha scheme, at least 25% of the procurement from each farmer should be procured for the particular season. So this will be a good beginning, and this will create confidence in the farmer's mind, and they start growing these crops, non-conventional crops. Those are millets, pulses and oilseeds. Friends, the locally procured crops should then be incorporated into the Anganwadi supplementary nutrition and school midday meal programs. So these locally procured food grains or food items can be incorporated into the Anganwadi system and as well as the midday meal scheme. Right friends, this would mean a large and steady market for farmers while also making a huge contribution to tackling India's twin syndemic of malnutrition and diabetes. Since these crops have a much lower glycemic index while providing higher content of dietary fiber, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and antioxidants. So these are the health benefits. So it is a win-win situation for everybody, for the farmers, for the consumers, and government can ensure the welfare to the farmers. Friends, public investment in specific infrastructure required for millets and pulses, especially those grown through natural farming, would also help expand their cultivation. So the public investment is required here, especially for the crops that are grown under the natural farming system. Friends, India has a network of 2,477 mandis and 4,843 sub-mandis to safeguard farmers from exploitation by large retailers. So this is the network of mandis and sub-mandis in our country. Friends, this network is to be greatly expanded, as today only 17% of the farm produce passes through mandis. Friends, there is a lot of hue and cry surrounding the mandis that farmers are being exploited. But here, according to the authors, they say that only 70%, 17% of the farm produce passes through the mandis. Friends, to provide farmers access within the radius of 5 kilometers, India needs 42,000 mandis, which are also in need of urgent reform. What is the requirement of mandis? 42,000 mandis. Friends, rather than moving in the direction of weakening or dismantling the mandis, we need to make their functioning more transparent and farmer friendly. So instead of weakening and dismantling in the existing mandis, we need to make their functioning more transparent and farmer friendly. Friends, these statements we can also see in the context of the three farm laws that have been brought in by the central government, and the farmers protesting in opposition to those farm laws. Friends, rural India will be focal point. So let us understand how. Ever since the second five-year plan initiated in 1956, the central plank of Indian economic policy has been to get people off the land and move them into industry and urban areas. So the emphasis ever since the second five-year plan was to bring out the bring out the people from agriculture sector and to integrate or make them part of the industrial sector or the secondary sector. That has been the emphasis. Friends, however, even after all these efforts, the United Nations estimates that in the year 2050, around 800 million people, that is 80 crore people, will continue to live in rural India. So by 2050, 80 crore Indians still will be living in rural areas. So it is going to be predominantly rural India. Friends, given this unique Indian demographics transition, agriculture will need to be greatly strengthened, especially bearing in mind the complete nightmare our urban metropolis are for current and future balance, for current and future migrants. So at the rate at the we are at the 32 to 33% of urbanization. With this low rate of urbanizations, our urban areas are a nightmare, and they are with many problems at present rate of urbanizations. So in the future, the situation is going to be further complicated. So in order to prevent migrants falling prey in the urban areas, we should take measures to strengthen the rural areas itself. Right, friends? In a context characterized by grave and growing inequalities, as also historically skewed balance of power, no reform can succeed that does not strengthen the weak and the excluded. So, no reform is good that does not strengthen the weak and the excluded. Right, friends? Agriculture can only be reformed by radically enhanced state capabilities and qualitatively better regulatory oversight, rather than by opening up spaces for more predatory action by those already entrenched in the positions of overwhelming power in the economy. So instead of conceding space to the exploitative exploitative traders and private companies, the government should take the lead and it should protect and ensure the welfare of the farmers as well as the consumers, and this can be achieved by taking care of the rural India and as well as the agriculture sector. This is what the author suggests. Friends, this is all for today. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Have a nice day.